Plucked straight out of the comments section and served up hot and fresh to you. Today, we will figure out how much a pro wrestling show costs. I'm Mike Quackenbush, and this is Till We Make It. Right here on my channel, I make videos for fellow pro wrestlers. But today, perhaps we're going to expand that scope a bit to include aspiring pro wrestling promoters. We're going to attempt to arrive at an exact dollar figure so that we know exactly how much a pro wrestling show costs. And in order to do this, I'm going to call on my decades of experience promoting and booking my own events, as well as consulting on and producing events for other pro wrestling organizations. But before we dive in, I want to let you know, if you want to take your participation, your support until we make it to the next level, you can join our community over on Patreon by following the link down below in the descriptus. And when you do, not only will you instantly get access to our private Discord, but you'll get early access to the videos that end up here on the channel. Sometimes you'll see them weeks before they are published. In addition to which, you're going to unlock more than 70 exclusive videos that will never be shown here on the channel, all for as little as $5. Now to the matter at hand. I think there are 13 things we're going to have to cover if we want to figure out how much a pro wrestling show costs. A quick frame of reference before we dive in. The lion's share of pro wrestling cards that I've put together have taken place on the East Coast of the United States. So a lot of the figures I'm going to be drawing on are biased toward the going market rate on the East Coast of the United States. And while I've certainly produced tours of the Midwestern US, overseas tours, most of the numbers I'm going to be able to call on in order for us to arrive at an actual dollar figure will no doubt show a little bit of a bias toward the prices and figures you see on the East Coast. And everything that I'm going to use as reference is current within the last 3 years. Ready? Let's go. Up first, we have to consider the cost of renting a wrestling ring. Now, if you happen to own your own wrestling ring and you're able to transport it, set it up, and tear it down on your own, well, this cost is already covered for you. But if you are starting from scratch, you have none of those pre-existing resources to call upon, you're going to have to rent a wrestling ring. Now, it's important that you understand, almost every ring rental includes setup and tear down of the ring in the cost. In the entirety of my career, I have only ever once come across someone who rented a ring and it did not include the setup of the ring. However, different ring rentals might calculate the transportation cost differently, like this. Some make it part of their flat fee, others may charge you by the mile they have to drive to deliver the ring to your event. So if you're planning to promote in Missoula, Montana, and the nearest ring you can rent is in Seattle, Washington, well, that's going to be a very expensive ring rental if they charge you by the mile. But I would say, more times than not, you're just going to be looking at a flat fee. And I went back and pulled the records of the last 8 times I had to rent a ring, and I averaged it, and it worked out very neatly to $475 per ring rental. So that's where we're starting. To get the ring covered, we're out $475 US. The second cost we must consider is the venue rental, the place that is going to host your event. Are you renting a small hall? Are you renting a theater? Are you renting an arena to put on your pro wrestling show? Because generally speaking, venues don't come for free. Or if someone's offering you a venue for free, you better make sure you read the fine print in that contract really carefully. This has actually happened to me in that they claimed the venue was being offered free of rent, provided that the audience we drew bought a certain amount of food and beverage while they were there. And if they didn't, we were responsible to pay them the balance of that. So if they stipulated that the audience had to spend $10,000 in food and beverage, but the audience on hand only actually bought 3,000? Guess who got stuck with that bill for the other 7 grand? This guy. So, of course, I went back, I pulled all the sheets I had on events that I put together myself, spreadsheets from events that I produced for other organizations, and I put together an average. So I had 12 to call on here where I saw the venue rental fee, and that worked out to an average of $2,100. In my experience, it's always better to over budget so you have money left over at the end than to under budget and discover you don't have enough to cover costs. This third category we're going to talk about is one where it's easy to do a little over budgeting. So don't worry if it's not exactly relevant to your experience. But category 3 is chair rental. Now, if you're going into a theater space, chances are there are seats already bolted to the floor that aren't going anywhere. But if you decided to rent a banquet hall in your hometown to host this wrestling card, well, chances are a banquet hall is going to charge you to rent every chair there. And if you're expecting a couple hundred fans to turn up at your event, you're going to have to rent a couple hundred chairs. And you can go extremely cheap. I found a record that was 3 years old where the cheapest chair available through a company right here in my home state of Pennsylvania was 75 cents per chair. But at the other end, you could be spending as much as $5 a chair. I took the average of the last 3 chair rentals I did, which all included free delivery, and that average figure was $605. Let's talk a little bureaucracy, shall we? Category 4 is licensing. You may need a license from a governing body like a state athletic commission based on where you're planning to promote your show. And I know the cost involved here in my home state as well as some others, and I can tell you on average you're going to spend $100 to get a promoter's license in order to stage a show. At least that's true here in most states in the US. Number 5 is also a bit of bureaucracy. We have to talk about insurance for your pro wrestling show. Now, some places, like my home state of Pennsylvania, require you to be bonded by an insurance company in order to run pro wrestling shows. In addition to that cost, most venues are going to require you to have event insurance that protects them in case of liability issues, like someone slips and falls while they are attending your pro wrestling show, but they bring a lawsuit against the venue for that slip and fall. They need to be protected against that. I went back and pulled total insurance figures from 6 cards that I put on personally, averaged it all out, and it worked out to be $533, and then the 3 that repeats off into forever, which we're just going to drop out of the total and call it $533. This next one, the 6th category, is the one rookie promoters most often overlook when structuring their show budget. Don't make that mistake, because you want a ringside physician at your live pro wrestling show. And I know there are parts of the world where you can get away with putting on pro wrestling performances without a medical professional in attendance. And I'm telling you, the first time something goes sideways and a serious accident occurs on your watch, you'll be very glad there is a trained medical professional in the venue. And on average, you can expect to spend on a ringside physician $300. If you imagine that your pro wrestling show is only going to draw in the dozens of people, well, maybe you could scrimp a little bit on this next one. But if you're expecting hundreds or even thousands of people to show up for your pro wrestling show, then you're going to have to invest in a security detail. And I did a lot of digging and I could only find one recent record of my own on hiring a security detail. And the cost for having 6 security people for a total of 4 hours at my event was $1,200 US. Unless you're expecting the performers on your show to simply step out from behind a shower curtain you've duct taped above a doorway, then you're going to need an entranceway. And just a pro tip for you here, if you end up renting the same entranceway more than 3 or 4 times from the same vendor, you've paid for the entire thing. You could have built it yourself for what that cost is. It's the same thing when you rent a tuxedo. Buying a tuxedo is just 2 or 3 times what it would cost you to rent one. So if you think you're going to need an entranceway on a recurring basis, maybe commission having one made for you permanently. But for the purpose of arriving at our total figure today, let's talk about renting an entranceway. And the average I came across from scouring my records was an entranceway rental costs, on average, $279. And along the same lines as your entranceway, we have to consider the cost of pipe and drape. Now, if you have some experience in the theater world or staging concerts, you're already familiar with pipe and drape. But if this is your first time producing any kind of live event, pipe and drape might be something you've never even heard of before. And these are giant telescoping poles that go up into the air that you can pull an opaque curtain along. And this pipe and drape combination allows you to block off sections of a show space, whether it's a VFW hall in your hometown or a gigantic arena. It effectively creates the backstage area. Of course, you could rent a place where that's part of the building's permanent structure, but more times than not, you're going to have to rent sections of pipe and drape based on the size of the venue that you're in. And most panels of drape you can rent will be between 16 and 22 feet in width. So you just need to measure how wide you want your backstage area to be and rent the appropriate amount of pipe and drape. But I'll tell you, always get a little extra. Just save yourself that migraine on show day already. Rent at least one extra section of pipe and drape. It just never works out exactly the way that you think. You always need an extra section of pipe and drape when you're doing this. Trust me. Average cost of pipe and drape rentals that I could dig up, $495. Now that you've created a backstage environment with all that pipe and drape, what are you going to put there to make your performers comfortable? Are you going to provide some food and drink? Well, of course you could spend hundreds, thousands of dollars on an impressive catering spread, but let's say that you're going to go a little more modest. You're going to fill a cooler up with bottles of water, Gatorade and energy drinks, and a couple platters of sandwiches from Subway. Well, even a modest spread like that, at least in my records, averages out to $74. Okay, let's shift our focus now into production. And I'm going to put a couple things under that larger heading of production. That's going to include your camera operators, that's going to include any additional lighting that you need to rent for your event, and it's going to include audio equipment, the sound system. How are you going to play all those great entrance themes if you don't have a sound system? But I want to let you know, this figure I've worked out for you does not include any type of pyrotechnic. I do not have enough information to source a number on pyrotechnic for your event. And just to give you a word of caution about that, if you're headed that route, you need someone in your home region who has the correct license or permit to even set those off. So that's an entirely separate expense that is not covered by this figure, an average of production costs for camera, light, and sound, which worked out to be $1,355. We're almost at the end, just 2 left to go. And before we cover them, if you haven't yet, would you leave a like-a-palooza on this video, please? Recently, Google Analytics told me 52.7% of the people that watch my videos aren't subscribed. So if you're one of those 52.7%, why don't you take a moment right now, help me out, subscribe down below. I would really appreciate it. This next figure we have to contemplate is one where it is easy to spend exorbitant sums of money because it's the marketing budget for your pro wrestling show. And I've run campaigns that have included billboards in major cities, local inserts during Monday Night Raw broadcasts, down to poster and flyering costs, even getting digital ads made up or hype videos produced. You could spend way more than this average amount that I was able to pull from 12 events in the last 3 years. But just on average, you could expect to spend on marketing $980. And we saved the big one for last. What is the talent budget for your pro wrestling show? Now, the records I was able to pull included all the costs related to airfare, travel, and hotel rolled into the talent budget. So if you are flying all your talent in, well, of course, it's going to be way higher than this average number. If everyone insists on having their own hotel room, nobody is going to buddy up. Nobody's willing to heel a mattress down on the floor and make life easy on the promoter. Well, you're going to spend a whole lot more on your talent budget. But I was able to average several event talent budgets of my own and other companies that I have worked for, and that average talent budget worked out to be $3,005. It's time for the big reveal. How much does a pro wrestling show cost? Well, based on everything we just discussed, that total is $11,501 US. Now keep in mind these are average figures that we use to arrive at that total. And yeah, could you haggle down the person renting you the ring and save a few bucks? Of course you could. Could you spend a little more money on your talent budget? Of course you could. Nevertheless, this is a great starting point to understanding promoting pro wrestling. $11,501. And just to break that open a little bit, to get your gears turning, think about this. If your average ticket price is $20, how many people do you need to have in your house just to break even? 575. You need to sell 575 tickets at $20 a pop just to break even. And if you want to be profitable, if you want a healthy profit at the end of the night, well, you want to double your investment back. If you're putting in $11,501, right, you want to make back whatever that is, 2302, I don't know. Somebody check my math down below in the comments. You're really talking about attracting much closer to 1,200 paying customers if you want to walk away with a nice, healthy profit. And I think once you start to consider those numbers, your understanding of wrestling at all levels, at the independent level and at the corporate level, changes drastically. And that makes me think of this. I really do feel like every performing pro wrestler out there should at least once in their career endeavor to put on their own pro wrestling show. The way that you look at everything in professional wrestling changes irrevocably the moment you take off your performer hat and attempt to put on a promoter hat. Ready to take the plunge? If you're about to start structuring your first live pro wrestling show, watch this video. It's a step-by-step tutorial to help you along the way. And if the notion of contacting a venue for a rental seems daunting, don't sweat it. Your old pal Mike's got a video about that too.